Welcome to Crescent City Crime, dear listeners. I'm Tracy.
And I'm Brian.
Thank you to everybody who has been listening to us. And if you are new, welcome. And if you are not new, welcome back.
Welcome aboard, and we're happy to have you listening to us. We really enjoy talking to you.
Yes, we do. All of our social media links are in the show notes. Make sure to tell your friends about us, but also
Tell your enemies, especially your enemies.
we welcome any ratings and reviews on every podcast platform. Make sure to subscribe to us. We are everywhere, including on YouTube.
And it costs nothing, absolutely nothing, to do any of this.
It costs nothing for you to sit here and listen to us yik yak.
That's right.
Yes. So, despite the popular image of the white male serial killer, many serial murderers in the United States are in fact not white. They just don't make headlines as often because serial killers usually target people of their own race, and non white victims generally attract less media interest than white victims. We've seen this time and again.
Yes, we have. Yes, we see white soccer moms just go absolutely crazy.
Oh, and we say this as white people.
Yes.
So we
Yeah.
are white, by
We
the
know
way.
we know the type.
We know the type. Yes, we do.
Yes.
But the next two episodes will revolve around a person who committed heinous crimes for over a decade. He was a black man, but all of his victims, except for two, were white women. The women were ranged in age from 21 to 65. And in spite of their age differences, and on occasion they were a different race, there was still a pattern. The women all kind of looked a certain way. They all had the high, prominent cheekbones, and they were all brunettes. Some of them were accomplished career women, and some were just starting their womanhood with grand ambitions for life. But ultimately, the biggest thing that these women had in common was that they met the man that nobody ever wants to meet, and that man was Derrick Todd Lee, the Baton Rouge serial killer.
Him.
Yes, him. So we are going to start with his early life, which probably won't surprise anybody, involves crime.
Oh, yeah, you
Yeah.
don't say.
Derrick Todd Lee was born to Samuel Ruth and Florence Lee on November the 5th, 1968, in St. Francisville, Louisiana. Florence was only 17 when her son was born, and she and Samuel lived with her mother. Although Samuel and Florence were only together for a couple of years and they never married, they also had a daughter together named Teresia. Samuel was not listed as the father on either child's birth certificate, and the couple split soon after Teresia was born. It is said, or it is known that Samuel had severe mental health issues, and he was arrested and charged with attempted manslaughter in 1991. So this is Derrick Todd Lee's father. It's not a good person to have around children.
Yes, obviously a bad influence, but for someone like Derrick Todd Lee, it's there's a bit more to the story than that.
There always is more to the story. Florence married Coleman Barrow. Coleman worked hard and he treated Derrick and Teresia like his own. The couple was religious and they raised the children in a Christian home. Coleman would discipline the children through physical punishment, and this was a common occurrence in the household. Derrick Todd Lee was severely and frequently abused by his stepfather. Upon entering school, it was determined that Derrick was developmentally challenged and he was placed in special education classes. According to reports, Lee was often ridiculed by his classmates. In addition to teasing him for being developmentally challenged, the other children would taunt him for sucking his thumb and calling his teacher Mama. So to me, though, when I read about young Derrick Todd Lee, I do think of a person who was not raised in a good environment, had issues in school, Had to be in special ed. I mean, we knew kids like that growing up.
We do, and the vast majority of the time, they don't grow up to become serial killers.
Thank goodness for that.
Yes, yes.
Derrick Toddley also abused animals, and he began peeping, excuse me, and began peeping into his neighbors' windows at a very young age. And at this point, he developed the habit of denying his bad behavior, and he refused to accept responsibility for his actions. It's at a young age that you're starting to see this behavior emerge.
Yeah, obviously, since this is happening at a very young age, it's more than just his father.
It's more than just his father, yes.
Yeah.
At the age of 12, 13, you are old enough to know the difference between right and wrong.
No, most definitely, and something seriously wrong if you take pleasure in inflicting pain upon animals who don't understand what's going on,
Yeah,
don't know why you're hurting them.
yeah. I'm not gonna. When I was doing research for this, I didn't even want to I did not read the descriptions of his abuse, and I'm not gonna read them on the air either. That's all you really need to know is that he mistreated animals.
Yes, and that's a trait that's common to the most evil people who ever walked this earth. Deliberate mistreatment and torture of innocent creatures who have no idea what's happening.
I agree with you. At the age of 13, Derrick burglarized a local candy store called Sweet Shop. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to probation. Later that same year, he physically attacked a neighbor when she confronted him about him peeping into her windows.
Which is obviously unreasonable behavior. Unreasonable to be a peeping Tom, and even more unreasonable to attack someone for calling you on it.
Yes, yeah. He was also suspected of attacking a couple during a 1993 case in Zachary, Louisiana. A young couple was attacked when they were alone in their car, and several years later, one of the victims, Michelle Chapman, picked Lee out during a police photo lineup. But by then, the statute of limitations for the crime had expired.
Yeah, for something like that, of course, there's still statute of limitations, of course.
Yeah.
Obviously, for murder, there is not.
Right. In 1988, Derrick Todd Lee met Jacqueline Sims. He married her on August the 17th of the same year. They got married in a place called Solitude, Louisiana. I didn't even know that place existed.
Me neither. Must be a pretty small town.
Oh, it has to be. Would you be surprised to learn that their marriage was unhappy?
No, no, I wouldn't, because individuals like that tend to be unhappy with a wife unless she is 100% compliant with unreasonable demands and tolerant of mistreatment.
Well, he abused and cheated on her, and he threatened her father with a gun. She remained married to him, though, and they did have 2 children together. In 1992, it is believed that Derrick Todd Lee committed his first murder when he was just 23 years old. Connie Warner lived in the Oak Shadow subdivision in Zachary, Louisiana. Now, Zachary is about 20 minutes from Baton Rouge, so it's not far at all.
Yeah, I passed Zachary several times.
Yeah.
On the way to Gonzales. Zachary is, fun fact, Zachary is the home to Zach's Potato Chips.
Oh, really? Is that where
Yes.
it is? Oh, okay. Yeah, I love Zach's.
As they say, the little chippery in Zachary, Louisiana. Yes. We're not sponsored by Zapp's, but...
Oh, but we would welcome it. Please, Zapp's.
Yeah.
Would you like to sponsor us?
Zapp's
we would
are
take it.
nice, what do you call those chips exactly?
What do you mean?
So they're fried a certain way.
Right. Well, I don't.
They're extra crunchy, and they have those
maybe they double fry them because I mean I think like when people tend to think of potato chips, they usually think like Lay's or Pringles, and those have a very certain texture. There's obviously a certain method in the way that the potatoes were cut and the way that they're prepared. And Zapp's obviously has their own way as well.
Yeah,
So,
that's a certain way they're fried, and they have those. You could say that they have these blister pockets.
yeah, those are nice.
Yeah, and
I don't
so
think I've
it's
ever seen a
kettle cooked.
kettle cooked.
Yeah,
Okay,
now I
yeah,
remember.
yeah.
I didn't even have to look it up. They're called kettle cooked potato chips. They take a bit more preparation and care than your regular, your regular thin cut chips do.
Right, and I don't think I've ever seen a blister on a Pringles.
No, different,
Different method.
different
See?
chips entirely, and it seems Pringles last forever. I never forget the time. It's like I found these Pringles in the back room at Target that were 3 years past the expiration date, and they tasted really fresh
Well,
somehow.
and to clarify, this is when you worked at Target. You didn't just go sneak into a back room at a Target.
No, no, this is when uh, I was in charge of back room for Target as a team leader.
Okay. All right. So, in August of that year, Connie Warner had complained to the police about a person that was peeking into the windows of her home. And on August the 22nd, she was reported missing. Her father, Jack, had gone to her house to check on her and discovered that Connie was not in the house. He called the police, and when they got there, they discovered signs of a violent attack. There was blood in several rooms, including the bedroom. And it was also reported that the washer and dryer had been moved, that indicated that Connie had tried to hold on as she was being dragged out of her house.
Ah, yeah, signs of struggle.
Very much so. Her vehicle was still parked outside, and they concluded that her body was removed from the scene by her attacker. Vomit was discovered in the car, and it was Connie's. Whatever happened to her in the house caused her to be sick, and her decomposing body was found 2 weeks later near Capitol Lake in Baton Rouge, and she was only 41 years old. Connie's father had recently changed the oil in her car and said that the mileage matched the distance from Connie's home to Capitol Lake and then back to the house. So investigators concluded that the person who attacked Connie used her car to dump her body and then parked the car back in the driveway. That's very brazen. That's incredibly brazen.
It is. That tells me the perpetrator had an arrogant sense of entitlement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Entitlement to just simply torture and murder a woman for his own pleasure, and to simply, not accept any responsibility for those actions.
Yes, and this is why stalking laws are so very important because he escalated from peeking into their windows, stalking them, and then ultimately it evolved into murder.
Yeah, that is why if typically if a woman reports that a certain individual whom she has some acquaintance with, it's usually a woman who has some acquaintance with the stalker. Okay, even if it's just someone that hardly know, like it could be a grocery store clerk, for example.
And they just become fixated.
Right, they become fixated. So this is why, okay, when it's reported that typically a pair of detectives finds the individual who is accused of the stalking and basically says, we'd like to have a talk with you, and they bring a recording device. And they essentially read you the riot act. They let you know, okay, this person does not want any contact with you whatsoever. They don't want you near their house. They don't want you near their car. They don't want you near them at all. And she is going to file a restraining order against you. So you need to leave her alone, essentially. And they appraise you of the consequences if you do not. Okay? But the most important thing about handling a stalker in this manner is that you put the stalker on notice that, okay, if something suspicious happens to this, if something bad happens to this person, you're going to be the first person we're going to look for. We know who you are.
Except you have to remember at this point, nobody really knew who Derrick Todd Lee was. At least not in this context.
Right.
All right. Another victim might have been a woman named Eugenie Boisfontaine. She disappeared June the 13th, 1997 from either her home on Stanford Avenue in Baton Rouge or from the LSU lakes where she would often take walks. Her credit cards were found aligned in a circle near the lakes on June the 14th, and her body was discovered on August the 7th in Bayou Manchac near the Alligator Bayou Bar. She had died from a skull fracture resulting in a beating, and she had never been officially linked to Derrick Todd Lee, but many investigators feel that the location of her home indicates that she was his first victim from Stanford Avenue. And I'm going to say the first victim from Stanford Avenue. She was only 34 years old, and there is a lot of questions that still surround this particular case. For instance, there was DNA from 3 different people found on her body, but none of those samples match Derrick Todd Lee. So that's kind of a murky one, but it might have been Derrick Todd Lee. Just put that out there. On May the 23rd of 2002, Christine Moore disappeared while jogging along River Road in Baton Rouge. This was not far from the home of a woman named Charlotte Murray Pace, who was murdered just a week later. Christine Moore's body was discovered on June 16th in a ravine that ran alongside the Ebenezer Baptist Church just a few miles further down River Road. Christine was working on her master's degree at LSU, and she was just 23 years old. And then now this next story of somebody who might have been one of Derrick Todd Lee's victims. It's a bit of a long one, and there's a lot of detail here. But I personally, like, after reading this, when I was putting this episode together, I do think that Derrick Todd Lee 100% did this. So in 2002, 65-year-old Mary Ann Fowler lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. She was married to Jerry Fowler, and he was the elections commissioner for Louisiana. He had been caught accepting kickbacks from contractors who produced voting machines and committing income tax evasion. In November of 2000, he agreed to plead guilty to the charges of malfeasance and conspiracy to commit money laundering, as well as 2 federal counts of filing false tax returns. In exchange, he received a 5-year prison sentence that he would serve at the Federal Correctional Institution in Beaumont, Texas.
That's not a very fun facility.
And you know something else? It was a long drive from Baton Rouge to get to Beaumont. Mary Ann would often make this commute, though. She was standing by her husband. So, on Christmas Eve, she left her home and was planning to drive to Lake Charles to spend the night with family before traveling to Beaumont to visit her husband on Christmas Day. She stopped at a strip mall in Port Allen to purchase food from a Subway sandwich shop. That evening, the Subway employees noticed that her Mazda was still in the parking lot. When they went out for a closer look, they discovered that Mary Ann's purse, keys, and the food she had purchased were lying on the ground in an open parking spot next to her vehicle. And some of her false fingernails were also on the pavement. And this is where, people talk about DNA under fingernails. But, certain fingernails, especially if they're like press-on nails and you don't actually use nail glue, they don't have a lot of resistance. So they are going to just pop off like this.
Yeah, those are going to easily break off.
Yeah. So there was no DNA found under these false fingernails. So of course this indicated a violent struggle and an abduction. The wrapped Christmas presents were still in the backseat of her car, so it didn't appear like robbery was a motive. There were no witnesses, but there was a black and white surveillance camera that was located inside of a liquor store, two doors down from the subway. So remember, it's all in a strip mall, so it's these businesses are kind of close together. You know, you say two
Yeah.
doors down, but in a strip mall, that's quite close.
Yeah, spitting distance from
Yeah.
each other. Yeah.
The camera was on a constant rotation, and it would capture a view of the parking lot through the front windows every 55 seconds. It was partially obscured by the building's awning, but the spot where Marianne's Mazda was parked was visible. The video was sent to the FBI for analysis, and from that footage, they were able to see that a dark colored 1994 or 1995 Chevrolet pickup truck was parked next to Marianne's car, and a man could be seen walking up behind Marianne and grabbing her. The camera then rotated away from the windows, but when it returned, it showed this man climbing into the pickup truck before speeding away. But they only caught the back of the abductor's head. They didn't catch his face at all on this video. But this did make investigators look into the possibility that her abduction was maybe connected to her husband's past criminal activities, but there was no evidence found for that motive. Okay. And her son was upset because he had wanted to spend the holiday with his mother, and he said that the last time that he talked to her was on Christmas Eve over the phone, and they had argued about her going to Texas. At the time of Marianne's disappearance, Derrick Todd Lee drove a maroon-colored 1994 Chevrolet pickup truck that resembled the truck seen in the surveillance footage. And when it was announced that police were looking for this truck, Derrick Todd Lee quickly sold it.
No, those are the days, huh?
Yeah,
Those are the days when, yeah, you could just do that. You could do that kind of stuff easily without getting much notice.
Now, a search of cell phone records revealed that Derrick Todd Lee made a call at 5:20 p.m., which pinged off a cell tower located just 14 miles outside Port Allen, and Marianne was abducted only 15 to 20 minutes after the call took place. Lee made a second call on his cell phone at 11:20, which pinged off a cell tower in Iberville Parish. Derrick's wife, Jackie, had planned to spend Christmas with her husband and their two children, but when she got home, her husband was not home, and he was never able to provide an alibi for that night. Jackie did not know that he was home until she woke up around 5 a.m. and saw that he was sleeping beside her. And the search for Marianne was extensive, and it covered hundreds of miles between Port Allen, Louisiana, and Beaumont, Texas. A forensic examination of the pickup truck Lee had sold failed to turn up any physical evidence. And later on, though, after they had caught Derrick Todd Lee, when he was questioned about Marianne's disappearance, he threw a temper tantrum and refused to say anything. So that tells me a lot.
Yeah.
Okay. Marianne Fowler's body has never been found, and the case remains unsolved. And she was 65 years old. It's very sad.
Yeah, so apparently we're seeing he has no regard for age or social status. He enjoys harming women.
Now, at the time of Marianne's abduction, Derrick Todd Lee had been already kind of practiced in killing women. Okay? But he wasn't that sophisticated because he did leave behind DNA evidence in other cases. And in fact, he left behind enough evidence to where on the day of Marianne's abduction, It was publicly announced that DNA testing had linked him to 4 murders. So the same day.
Wow.
Right?
4 murders in one day?
No, 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 no. He had been linked to 4 murders.
Oh,
But
okay.
on the same day that law enforcement announced publicly
Hmm.
that they had DNA to test,
Right.
he committed this crime.
Okay.
Okay, and I kind of think that when his refusal to answer any questions about Marianne Fowler,
Hmm.
I don't know, maybe that was kind of a defiance. I'm going to show you that you can't link me to this sort of arrogance.
Yeah, there's considerable arrogance and entitlement involved here. There's no surprise. Psychotic narcissists, of course, had this in abundance.
On April the 19th of 1998, Randy Niebrewer was abducted from her home, and this was just 1 block from the home of Connie Warner. So he's going back into the same places. We talk about how serial killers hunt their victims,
Hmm.
okay? And it is known that they generally tend to like to hunt in areas that they're comfortable with.
Yeah, they like to
Okay.
be in control of the
They
situation.
like to be in control of the situation. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So he went back to the subdivision again, okay? The house showed signs of a life and death struggle. Detectives David McDavid and Officer Ray Day worked this case. They concluded that someone had attacked Randy in her bedroom and then dragged her down the hall and into the kitchen. On the floor of the hallway, they found Randy's contact lenses side by side, just inches apart, because she was hit hard enough face down to just knock her contacts out.
Wow.
Drops of blood were spattered from the kitchen to the carport, and it is believed that she was picked up and put into a vehicle. And even more horrifying dimension to this is that her 3-year-old son was sleeping during the time his mother was being attacked.
Wow.
Yeah. Randy was 28 years old and she is still missing. Okay.
Mm.
In the kitchen, Detective McDavid found a bouquet of fresh flowers stuffed inside the garbage can with a pink trash bag that lined it. And outside in the carport, detectives found a roll of pink plastic garbage bags. And stuck to the outside of the roll was a drop of blood and a trace of semen. So this was the first time they were able to collect DNA from Derrick Todd Lee. Okay, it's first time. Gina Wilson Green was raped and murdered in her home on Stanford Avenue in Baton Rouge on September 23rd, 2001. She was a nurse, and when she did not show up for work on September the 24th, a coworker went to check on her. The cause of her death was determined to be strangulation, and she was 39 years old. The next victim was Geraldine Bar DeSoto. She was stabbed to death, and she was almost beheaded. Like, all the muscles in her neck were gone. So it's very violent, very vicious.
So only the head was connected mostly by vertebrae.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not easy to behead someone as someone might think, or as depicted in certain movies. Like, I'll give you an example of a time when a beheading depicted in the movie was entirely unrealistic. It was this horror movie that takes place in this haunted house, and it had Liam Neeson in it.
Oh, is
Is it called The Haunting?
I think it is called The Haunting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The Haunting. And this bell swings. Okay.
No, it wasn't a bell. It was a chimney flute.
It was a chin. Okay. Well, it hits the person in the
I
head.
think who got hit in the head was it was one of the Wilson brothers who was in the movie.
So
I think that's how he
the
died.
person is hit in the head, and it knocks the head off.
Yeah.
And I'm like thinking, That would not have happened. Okay, probably would have had a concussion, but would have been knocked back. That head would not have been removed. The body doesn't work that way.
Right.
There was nothing to just um, anchor that person's feet to the spot and make their entire body as like rigid as a bronze statue.
Right.
To
Yeah.
anchor the body for the head, and then the soft tissue head gets knocked off. No, doesn't work that way.
Well, unfortunately, in this case, for Geraldine Bar DeSoto, no, it probably was not easy for Derek Todd Lee to do that, at least not physically, but definitely mentally. He didn't care.
No, no, sure didn't.
He did not care. Okay? And the thing with this, too, that is just so saddening is that her husband was initially suspected of the crime before she was also linked to Derek Todd Lee. And Derek Todd Lee had a lot of rage. There's so much rage behind almost beheading somebody with a knife.
Yes, that's probably where the influence of the bad father comes in.
Mm.
It being so angry at the world, raged against society. Okay, but that's just simply a little more motivation. Okay. The bottom line is that he gained pleasure off of torturing and murdering people,
Well,
and it can't. The entire thing can't be pinned on revenge against society. It's a motivating factor, but in the end, this is another one of those serial killers whose hobby was to torture and murder people.
we'll get into this later on, but it was the murder of Geraldine Bar DeSoto specifically that got him a life sentence later on in court. Geraldine was just 21 years old. Now, Charlotte Murray,
But that makes the soccer moms angry.
what does?
Being a young white girl.
Yeah, it does.
Now, justifiable anger, though,
Right.
I'll say.
Now, Charlotte Murray Pace, who was known as Murray to her friends, had just graduated from LSU with a Master's of Business Associates. And at that time, Charlotte was the youngest person ever to receive that degree in LSU history. She had lived on Stanford Avenue, so again, going back to Stanford Avenue, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this was the same street, of course, that Gina Wilson Green had lived on. And right after graduation, Charlotte moved to Charlotte Avenue in Baton Rouge. And on May the 31st of 2002, she was stabbed 83 times with a flathead screwdriver. And according to what I've read, out of all the women that were victimized by Derek Todd Lee, Charlotte fought back the hardest. She was only 22 years old, and this was the case that got Derek Todd Lee the death penalty. Again, we'll get into that later on, but it's these two cases in particular that, due to the brutality of them, is what prompted prosecutors to ask for a life sentence for one murder and for the death penalty for another.
Yes, the brutality of a murder, of course, comes into play during the penalty phase of a trial, after guilt is established.
After guilt is established, you also need evidence. There's a lot of things that go into making a case. Pamela Piglia Kinmore was the owner of an antique shop in Denham Springs, Louisiana. The shop was named Comforts and Joys. On July the 12th, 2002, she disappeared from her home in Briarwood Estates in Baton Rouge. Her body was discovered 4 days later under the Whiskey Bay Bridge that stretches over the Atchafalaya Swamp, just west of Baton Rouge. She had been raped and her throat was slit several times to the point where she was almost beheaded. And she was 44 years old. The next victim was Trinisha Danae Cologne. And she was visiting her mother's grave in Grand Coteau, Louisiana, on November the 21st of 2002. Her mother had passed away just 7 months earlier. Vulnerable and alone, Derrick Todd Lee abducted her from the cemetery. 3 days later, she was discovered in a wooded area off Renau Drive in Scott, Louisiana, by a hunter. She had been raped and beaten to death, and at the time of her death, Trinisha was preparing to join the Marine Corps. And she was a black woman, and she was 23 years old. The final victim that Derrick Todd Lee had was Carrie Lynn Yoder. She had just returned from a New Orleans trip to celebrate Mardi Gras on March the 3rd of 2003. The day she returned, she disappeared from her home on Dodson Avenue in Baton Rouge. And 10 days later, she was found floating under the Whiskey Bay Bridge. Carrie was originally from Tampa. She was working on her master's degree at LSU, and her dream was to save Louisiana's wetlands. And she was only 26 years old. In between the deaths of Charlotte Murray Pace and Pamela Kinnamore, Derrick Todd Lee knocked on the door of Diane Alexander's rural St. Martin Parish home, asking for directions. He then pushed the door open and started to attack Diane. But in a twist of fate, Diane's son arrived home early. Diane had said that she had the air conditioning on, but Lee had turned it off so he could hear if somebody was pulling into the driveway. He also told Diane that he had been watching her. When her son arrived home, Derrick Todd Lee ran out of the house. Diane does not remember most of the attack. Lee hit her in the face multiple times. But Diane's son was able to identify the car, which was a gold car with a dented hood. And Diane herself was able to work with police to create a composite sketch. Now, up until this point, nobody could really identify Lee. He wasn't leaving people alive. So this was crucial evidence that was able to help capture him.
Yeah, now keep in mind, he was not murdering his victims to keep them quiet. He was murdering his victims because that was another one of life's simple pleasures for him.
Yeah, and he was very vicious, and when you look at the brutality of these things, to me, and I want to say any person, if you hear about these things or read about these things, and you wonder how could anybody do this to another person, you're on a good track in life, because people who don't see a problem with this do not ask those questions to themselves.
Yes, people who do not see a problem with this are also, chances are, they are psychotic narcissists as well. Sadistic psychotic narcissists. Because if you're one of that less than a fraction of 1% of the population who is like that, okay, then you're the monster. You are the problem. You are the real boogeyman. You are what makes people like myself and Tracy paranoid when we go about society.
And not just us. There's a lot of paranoid folks out there. Paranoid people. You are our people.
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
So, before we get to our final thoughts, I just want to say that in next week's episode, we're going to discuss how authorities captured Derrick Todd Lee. We're going to go over the evidence that led to his conviction and more. Because there is still more to get through. Today I wanted to talk about the victims. I wanted to talk about the patterns. Because the thing with serial killers is that there's always a pattern. Every time.
Yes. Because they, like anyone else, they have their tendencies.
Yeah, they have their tendencies. And he was hunting women who had, even if it was just a passing resemblance to each other, they had certain physical characteristics that he was looking for.
That probably matched his mother.
maybe match his mother. It's a
Yeah.
possibility. You know.
Good. Well, it's a good. There's a good possibility. You know, like for example, like when uh typically what the average man finds attractive in a woman are going to be features that are typically shared by his mother.
Well, something that I did read recently is that for young boys, okay, so the boys who grow up to become psychosexual predators, okay, chances are when they were growing up, their mother behaved in a sexual manner towards them.
Probably without even knowing it.
Or maybe they did know it. Maybe they just didn't care. My point is that the it's actually important for a child's development growing up that their parents just remain asexual to them.
Yes.
Okay, they remain in that solidly no area. So it is not known if what the relationship really between Derrick's mother and Derrick was. Nobody's ever found anything out. Derrick Todd Lee did not talk. You know, some of these guys when they're in prison, they're eager to share their fascination. Derrick Todd Lee was not one of those.
Yeah. Well, that just makes him a loner.
Well, I think it made him feel powerful. He has these powerful secrets.
Oh, right, right.
Okay, powerful secrets. I mean, if you've killed somebody, and people search for miles for that person, and that person's never been found, even now, 21 years later, that's powerful. Derrick Todd Lee has already died in prison, so his secrets died with him. He died in his mind a powerful person because of this.
So while sitting in prison, he felt empowered by holding these secrets.
Yes, yes, exactly. And you know, some of these guys are like that. You know, like Rex. You know, for example, right now, I mean, Rex Hoyerman's not saying anything. He's not confessing. He's not sharing. Um, which the latest update on that is that attorneys are getting the evidence in discovery turned over to them. That was kind of the big thing that happened this week.
Mm-hmm.
But point is, Rex Hoyerman's not talking.
Right.
Okay, and it is possible that he will not talk because he wants to maintain that power.
Yeah. He wants to feel like he's in control.
And at the end of the day, I really think that's what a lot of these serial killers want, is to always be in control.
Yeah, they like to be in control of things. They're they're kind of like, you know, they're essentially like tyrants
Without a country?
without a country,
Yeah.
without a government. They like being controlled. They wish they had more power than they have, but they're not going to let that get in the way of doing what they enjoy doing.
Right.
What they wish they could do with without the law getting in their way.
Yes.
And they know what they're doing, and they know it's against the law. They know it's wrong. And the number one reason why they understand it's wrong is because they would tell you it's wrong if you did it to them.
Yeah. But rules for thee, but not for me.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up this episode?
I pretty much already said what I had to say for this episode.
Yeah. Well, we've said a lot today, and dear listeners, this is why I always say to remember that we're all human beings, because if you don't remember that, then we're all going to be in trouble.
And if it's dark, it's dangerous, and you're feeling really paranoid about it, don't go there in the first place, but do go to see Barbie and Barbenheimer, both very cerebral movies and excellently done.
I really enjoyed Barbie a lot. And I didn't even really play with Barbie, but I did enjoy that movie.
Yeah. Oh, my sister played with Barbie for a little while till she got tired of it and played with GI Joes along with me and the Star Trek Mego figures as well.
Although it is making me want to buy a Barbie and buy a GI Joe and like make a combat Barbie.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
As one of the, I won't say who, one of the Barbie characters in the movie uh, was wearing, in one scene, wearing something that would have come from a G.I. Joe doll, a 12-inch G.I. Joe doll. And another scene wearing something else that would have come from a 12-inch G.I. Joe doll. They had to be subtle about it, of course, because, of course, you know, they didn't want to pay Hasbro to feature G.I. Joe in a Mattel movie,
Oh,
you know.
I think you just got Mattel in trouble, Brian. You told everybody the secret.
And you know, really for making it subtle because after all, it's like when you see that girl who would like, you know, say like borrow a bandolier from a GI Joe figure and put it on Barbie, you know, or you know, borrow a pistol or a rifle from GI Joe and give it to Barbie or a helmet, you know. You had to be. It was like it would always be subtle, you know. I would see it would always be subtle, you know, and the girl would be like waiting for you to ask about her GI Joe accessorized Barbie, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
She's
Well,
not just gonna say, "Oh, look at what I did." She's just gonna let you notice, you know. And the movie does that too, you know. Um,
yeah.
so
Maybe the next Barbie movie should be like a GI Jane but with Barbie. She
well,
she makes the army totally fabulous.
yeah,
You
well,
know, pink camouflage, which already exists. Pink camouflage is a thing, right?
it is a thing, and it's you know it's made its way to firearms finishes on certain rifles and pistols to accommodate the growing demographic of women who enjoy firearms.
I still want my purple gun.
We'll help you pick one out, but it needs to be the right one. It can't be one that's just, oh, I want that gun because it has a purple frame on it. You see what I'm saying? I mean,
I know.
if it's one that you're not going to enjoy shooting at the shooting range, there's no point in having it. It's a waste of money, you know.
I know.
So it's got to be the right one, and you know they're doing more and more. We'll find you the right one.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Until next week, be safe, be kind. Remember that we're all human beings. It is very hot out there, so make sure that you're staying hydrated. Drink your water all day long. And don't park next to vans. And join the Barbie Army.
And if you are being questioned by law enforcement and you are not the victim or the witness to a crime, lawyer up and hydrate yourself as well.
All day, every day, hydrate. Right now in the summer. All right, listeners, till next week. Bye.